اثباتی مربوط میشه به 3 نفر از شخصیت‌های اصلی کنفرانس ما و در ابتدا یک معرفی کوتاهی خواهیم داشت. هر کدوم از افراد خودشون معرفی میکنن. من خلاصه عرض میکنم جناب آقای مایکل مالوف هستن، خانم لارن بوت هستن، آقای فیلیپ جرالدی هستن و آقای اسکات بنت.
I'm formerly with the Department of Defense. Pleased to be here today, and we're enjoying our visit.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Lauren Booth. I'm a journalist and broadcaster from the United Kingdom, and I have been involved in the activism to support the people of Palestine for justice and freedom for over 10 years. Thank you.
Phil Giraldi. I'm a former CIA operations officer involved in counterterrorism. I worked in Europe and the Middle East for 18 years. I've had extensive experience in the Middle East. I became disenchanted with the U.S. government's foreign policy, with the invasion of Iraq, and have been a critic of it pretty much ever since.
My name is Scott Bennett. I'm a former United States Army officer and worked as a contractor for the State Department Coordinator for Counterterrorism Office. I'm also the author of Shell Game, which is a military whistleblowing report to Congress detailing terrorist financing that was being channeled through the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton State Department. And I reported this to Congress and to the President of the United States about illegal terrorist financing that have been used in the current mercenary operations in Libya and Syria. And I've come here as part of the New Horizons Conference to speak up and to entertain and explore the Iranian people and culture. And what I have derived since being in your wonderful country is that Iran is a great country with great people and great culture. The American people do not understand this, and we are going to be returning and giving the American people the truth and giving our best efforts to serve in a capacity to establish peace between our countries. Thank you.
میوه این 3 روز که کنفرانس در مشهد بود یک بیانیه‌ای هستش که خانم لارن بوت زحمت میکشن قرائت میکنن. نامه‌ای است خطاب به رئیس جمهور آمریکا از طرف شرکت کنندگان کنفرانس.
This letter is to Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. It is CC'd to the International Criminal Court and the UN Security Council. It reads, Dear Mr. President, on this 70th anniversary of the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians from their homes, be advised, we are hereby giving you legal notice of a massacre beginning at the time of the Nakba anniversary in order for you to register a response and call upon the Israelis to cease and desist in your capacity as President of the United States and a permanent member of the Security Council and NATO. Be advised, you are hereby served legal notice of the following: that your oath as President of the US and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces is hereby accepted, and you are expected to fulfill that oath by conforming to your constitutional responsibilities and duties. You are expected to advise the following bodies about this legal matter, including but not limited to the United States Congress, the United Nations Security Council, and the International Criminal Court at The Hague. Be advised, you are hereby served legal notice of the following. that false flag attacks may be used by Israeli agents in order to assign blame to Palestinian factions and thereby escalate the incident into a larger conflict in order to falsely draw the United States and American military personnel into an artificially created conflict. Be advised, you are hereby served legal notice. Any potential false flag attack and consequent military escalation represents a clear and present danger to the citizens of the United States of America, because it may be designed to trigger and escalate American military actions against Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Iran, and Russia, since these nations are opposed to the transfer of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and rising tensions already exacerbated by the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA. I'm not going to read the legals. Let's go to the end. We hereby request full whistleblower protections as we, as former government and military officers and officials, are fulfilling our oaths on the U.S. Constitution. Please contact us immediately about this matter, and we hereby request an opportunity to debrief you and Congress. This will now be signed by the signatories. Phil Giraldi, Michael Maloof, Scott Bennett, yes, and I will be witnessing it. Sarah Jane Booth, Lauren Booth, journalist.
میتونیم سوالا رو شروع کنیم.
This is, so the incident yesterday of 2,771 injured, mostly by bullets used by snipers of the Israeli army, plus 59 Shaheed dead Palestinians, including many injured journalists, is only an escalation of efforts made by Israel in the last 4 weeks of a specific time when the Palestinians are showing their exhaustion with the lack of international support, and they are using their bodies and their lives in a peaceful way and giving them to the cause of freedom. And it must surely be a crime for a heavily armed military to use human beings as sniper practice in this way. We call upon all international bodies to take exception to this and to cease to put pressure on Israel at once, including the withdrawal of their embassies in significant countries in order to stop these massacres increasing.
Well, let me take the last bit first. My presence in Iran right now basically is connected with the fact that since Donald Trump announced that the embassy would be moved in Israel, and subsequently the rejection of the JCPOA agreement with Iran, tension has gone up to such a level that, in my humble opinion, we are extremely close to a war situation. Again, in my opinion, Israel has been provoking the situation. Israel wants a war with Iran, preferably one fought by the United States. And I think those of us up here believe it's up to us who basically want to see a non-war situation, are thinking in terms of raising issues that can be of convincing interest to the American public and others, that war and the situation in the Middle East is not necessarily the only option. And in particular, Iran, of course, is a place where one would come to because Iran, above all other countries, has been vilified by both the United States and Israel. And I think we would all agree that vilified unfairly.
My presence here today is to underscore a very serious crossroads where we are right now with respect to impending action that could occur as a result of the pulling out of the JCPOA and the movement of the embassy. I say that because some of us here, of all of us, have experience going back to 2003 and events leading up to the invasion of Iraq. And in my capacity as being in the office of the Secretary of Defense, it was my job to take unconditional terms to the hierarchy in the policymakers in the Pentagon that I had received through intermediaries in Lebanon and Syria, basically laying out 6 unconditional terms at the time, 2 of which we could have tested immediately. And Syria was really pushing it at that time simply because they knew that if we invaded Iraq, there would be major spillover into Syria. They were rejected. What were 2 we could have tested immediately? 1, Iraq, I should say Saddam Hussein said we could bring in 5,000 U.S. troops to look for weapons of mass destruction. We could have walked in. Number 2, they were prepared to release to us a terrorist by the name of Abdul Yassim, who happened to be the Iraqi American who was involved in the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. All of those points were rejected. The determination was made to go ahead and attack. And frankly, my involvement in this cost me my job, because the view was that I was not part of the team, and I was actually, in effect, working for the Syrians. I think with respect to what is going on today, we're seeing this all over again. And I say that because at that time, John Bolton, who's now the National Security Advisor to the President, was the Undersecretary of State. And at that time, Mr. Bolton told me and a few others that their intention was to not only take out Baghdad, but to go into Damascus, then Tehran, Libya, and Saudi Arabia. At that time, those countries were considered to be the enemies of Israel. So where are we today? John Bolton is now the National Security Advisor, and he's beginning to profess the very same views that he did back in 2003. To me, that is scary. What we're seeing today is a step beyond the art of the deal, and it represents a more significant geopolitical strategy of the U.S. and Israel in alliance with Saudi Arabia. The issue of Jerusalem and Trump's exit from the JCPOA is but a step in that direction to bring down Iran's leadership and contain Russian influence in the Middle East. Very simple. We hear John Bolton talking about this all the time. He's talking about, he's also speaking about regime change in Russia, Iran, and North Korea. This then opens the door for Israel to hit Syria in all. This represents a strategy change from Trump's previous positions of pulling out of the Middle East. If you recall, just a few weeks ago, he didn't care about it. What this now represents, because of Bolton, is that the neocons are back to the pre-2003 era. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, what does this portend if the JCPOA is ultimately turned down, the U.S. pulls out, enters into a trade war with Europeans who insist upon staying in it, and ultimately could have to succumb to U.S. pressure for sanctions. What does this mean? In my opinion, this signifies that China, Russia, and Iran will be drawing lines in the sand and conceivably set up a multipolar world, create a multipolar world that ultimately will begin to split up countries even more than we see now. So with that, I will we'll move on, and I'll be happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
I'll just add to my colleagues' comments, which I agree with entirely. The material that I reported to the United States Congress and the military and President Trump and others starting in 2012 are available at www.shellgamewhistleblower.com. Shellgamewhistleblower.com. And all of us up here have served in the United States government and or military and have served proudly, and we have sworn an oath to support and defend our Constitution of the United States. And right now we witness that being shattered and destroyed by what is being resurrected as a neoconservative fascism, which was started in 2003 and has led us to 18 years of ruin and bloodshed across the Middle East. And it was completely unnecessary. And when we came over for this New Horizons conference, which I am eternally grateful for being put together, because it has attracted some of the most brilliant people in the United States of America and the United Kingdom and other countries. And we have done more in one session than the entire American diplomatic corps. We have created better ideas than anyone in the United States State Department, CIA, or Pentagon put together. And I can tell you that because I've been there for 3 days. And we are here out of love for our country, love for our citizens, and also with a firm affection for President Trump. And we are advising him that he is being given false information, false intelligence. He is being goaded into a potential war crime situation and a trap by John Bolton, Nikki Haley, and these neoconservative fascists that are feeding him false information about chemical attacks, which never occurred. There was no chemical attack in Syria. The conventional scientific evidence proves that beyond a reasonable doubt. And yet he is being goaded into military operations, essentially declarations of war, that are putting at risk United States citizens, their sons and daughters. And we are here to expose that, to analyze and develop conversations about that. We're here to advise the president that he has taken an oath to the United States, and he will be held accountable for that oath. And it is up to him to examine what the United States of America, the citizens, the people want. He was elected by the people to normalize relations with Russia, which every American citizen wants, and pull us out of these endless wars in the Middle East, which every American citizen wants. It is only the warmongers and the military-industrial complex which profit by bloodshed that don't want it. They want a unipolar world dominated by the United States, similar to Rome. Nobody wants that. No American citizen, no European citizen, and certainly not us. And this is the time that every European citizen has to decide, are they a slave to the United States? Are they going to act as slaves and abide by the decisions of the United States president and the puppets in Britain under Theresa May and Macron and Merkel? Or are they going to stand up and be individual European citizens and chart their own way? The European citizens want peace. They want to maintain the JCPOA. And so do the United States citizens. So we are asking President Trump to remember that. We're asking all of the European leaders to remember that. And we're also asking that this letter be sent to President Vladimir Putin of Russia, as well as the President of Turkey, as well as the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani. And we are also requesting an opportunity to debrief in person the heads of state of these countries and also the President of the United States to debrief him about all of the information that we've been discussing, because we will provide him the truth about the Iranian people, the Iranian culture. We will give him the true intelligence that he needs to make decisions that the American people want. And we will help the Iranian leadership understand that President Trump, in the rejection of the JCPOA, was rejecting Obama's JCPOA, because the Obama administration was perceived by Americans as very corrupt and diseased in many ways. But in rejecting the JCPOA of Obama, he now has the opportunity to present his own. And we ask him, in the new one that he presents, make no changes that threaten Iran, its culture, its people, its government.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Could we invite Phil, if you have any comments?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important to realize is that we started out with the meeting about the issue of Palestine, about the issue of Jerusalem, status of Jerusalem. And of course that was somewhat preempted by the JCPOA, and it was even more preempted by the violence that we've seen over the last couple of days. In a lot of ways, what we want to do is to create mechanisms to change the narrative about how people see what's going on in the Middle East. And we would describe changing the narrative as an infusion of truth to the lies that basically are being promulgated about various countries and about various groups. So that was a major objective, because in reality, if we're talking about the Palestinians, the road to Jerusalem for the Palestinians goes through Washington. Israel would not be doing what Israel does without 100% of support from Washington, and basically a blanket acceptance that whatever Israel does is fine. Nikki Haley in the UN today, I believe this morning, used the American veto, for example, to stop any kind of investigation into the slaughter in Gaza yesterday. I don't know, I haven't seen today if any more killing has taken place, but I suspect it has. Anyway, this is an unending disaster. It's a human crisis beyond belief, and it's absolutely incredible that much of the world is kind of sitting back and looking at it and not reacting. Thank God that the Turkish President Erdogan has pulled his ambassador out of Israel and has kicked out the Israeli ambassador from Ankara. I would like to see a whole lot more of that going on. But anyway, the idea here is that let's get some wedge issues going where we can figure out ways to make the politicians move on some of these issues. This is not an anti-Jewish campaign. This is a question of Israel, which is a state. It's a country, and it's a country that's behaving badly. And it should be judged on that basis. And we are attempting, basically, as I say, to create a new narrative that says, essentially, there are Palestinian rights, there are Israeli rights, and everyone in this region, including Iran, they have rights too. The United States has basically been the arbiter, or wanting to be the arbiter of what goes on in this region. It's time for the United States to butt out. Thank you.
Thank you. Just two more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, we'll take as many questions as you want.
Leave it open. سوال بعدی.
Well, I think what has already been seen is a massive escalation in the confidence of the Israelis that no activity, there is no comeback, no blowback from a mass amount of casualties witnessed by the media. The Palestinian media cover these. We see the images, and yet nothing is being done. So that gives them really a free rein. Now you've got Trump's, Ivanka's visited, Jared Kushner's visited. Now that the embassy is open in Jerusalem, they really feel they have carte blanche to do anything. And so this is an incredibly dangerous time for the Palestinians. We have to keep that in mind. It's also Ramadan, and there is a propensity for the Israeli military to attack when the Palestinians are fasting. And I would also watch out for the World Cup as well, because the Israeli state is known for burying bad news under mass world events. So it's a dangerous time, and we're looking for mechanisms to slow down the easy access to deaths and murder that's going on, and to call a halt to the warmongering, as the gentleman has said.
Yeah, I would add also that there's the psychological impact of it, which is essentially that the Palestinians, by the act of the United States government acting unilaterally, is denying Palestinian statehood. It's really that simple. The Palestinians have been undercut to the point where their viability and their ability to consider themselves a state down the road is gone. This is going to fuel terrorism. This is also a human crisis. Israel is not the only state in the region that has the right to be sovereign. The Palestinians, as the UN decided in 1947 when it did the partition, were to have absolutely equal rights in the area. And so this is just common humanity. This is doing what's right. And the United States, as the enabler of this, has to be pushed in the right direction, and hopefully comments by folks like us will help that.
I would like to point out further that Saudi Arabia, which is part and parcel of this cabal of Israel, United States, and Saudi Arabia itself, doesn't care about the Palestinians. They've said so. They have made, Crown Prince Salman has made that very clear, and this is being reflected in the way the Israelis are running roughshod over them, over the Palestinians, and getting those lame, idiotic comments out of the State Department today about their reaction to the violence that's going on in Gaza. I only took a light blurb of it. I don't know exactly what the comment was, but it was to the effect that they basically brought it on themselves. So, go ahead. Well, I think that what we're seeing here is something, again, that's much larger. This cabal of these three countries is using the Palestinian issue as even a stepping stone to far greater issues, particularly aimed at Iran. And this is what I'm finding disturbing. Because of the experience we had back in 2003, I'm seeing this is history repeating itself. This is how things went before and how things are going again. It's a nice formula, and it works, and those guys know it. And I'm afraid that what we're seeing here is the very strong prospect that even theoretically, Iran were to do the fixes that Donald Trump made, I don't think it's going to make any difference to him, because they are hell-bent on regime change. And that's a very dangerous problem that I see forthcoming. And that's going to create even as much problems, even more, because it's going to bring Russia in on this. And the reason Russia is going to be involved in this is because they are working with not only China but also Iran. And Russia, Mr. Putin, is not going to tolerate being held in a passive role. He's going to react. And this is when we're going to see the fireworks begin. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Crown Prince Salman, once he bought off Trump in purchasing for $300 billion in arms, he basically bought Trump. He basically bought him. And both Israel and the United States see the U.S. advent of further U.S. troops going in. And it's a never-ending thing. Israel always likes to play victim. They would like to be, they want the United States to commit its troops to do its fighting for it. And this vicious circle has got to stop.
Did you, are you, these warnings that you're mentioning, that they're so hell-bent on regime change, it's actually a question for all of you. Are you also conveying this to Iranian officials at some point? I mean, anyone can answer. Maybe Michael, because
There's a Logan Act,
yeah.
which is a good reason not to convey these impressions to Iranian officials. We are not representatives of the U.S. government, and it's not our place to tell a foreign government how to behave or what to do.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
But we're confident they're watching the news and they have gotten the message.
Can you, sorry, Eric Randolph from AFP. Can you talk a bit about to what extent do you think the regime change plan has actually been well considered, thought through? The impression we get is that they hadn't really thought about the next step after ripping up the JCPOA, and that there were quite strong divisions even within the cabinet and even between Bolton and Pompeo and Trump. Not to say that there was a great planning on the next stage back in 2003, but nonetheless, taking on Iran in a concerted fashion sounds like an even more complicated task. Do you feel that that's actually been fully planned out and considered?
I think the clear answer to that is it hasn't been clearly thought out. The United States since 2001 has been completely incapable of designing an end game, a way out of what it starts. And this is why it's still involved in Afghanistan, why it's still involved, although about to get kicked out of Iraq, interestingly enough, and still involved in Syria with no end in sight for that, because the U.S. troops will be there to watch the Iranians. So no, there's no end game. This is the problem. The problem with Donald Trump is that he seems to act on impulse, and he also has a lot of really, really bad advisors.
I would just add to put some meat to the bones here. Bolton was involved in Iraq. Look at the disaster that brought in after the war. The fighting had finished. It actually helped create ISIS and the prolongation of that war. We saw what the U.S. Approach was toward Libya. President Obama admitted he did not have a second-day plan. He said that on 60 Minutes. So history, the facts are there. We don't have to make anything up on this. And if this kind of trend is going to be continuing, then we are facing a potential disaster and untold misery for millions and millions of people.
And let me add one thing. One of the warnings that we've had in history, of course, is the mass exodus and migration of these poor peoples that have been bombed into oblivion and their homes destroyed from Libya to Iraq to Afghanistan and elsewhere. And they've flooded up into Europe and are disintegrating the European culture and causing mass social problems and chaos in Europe. And Europe is struggling to handle that. How worse would it be if Iran, God forbid, there was a similar tragedy, catastrophe? And many in the American political establishment have already, such as Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, such as State Senator Dick Black, have already vehemently warned that if Syria and Iran have regime change, it will have a massive human tragedy and catastrophe of forced migration, and it would cause severe problems for Europe. And that's why Europeans need to wake up and make sure that they are not party to any of this regime change agenda.
Haven't you thought anything about a face-to-face talks between Trump and Iranian officials?
We have, and that's something that President Trump should do. I think he's been, as my colleagues have said, Trump has been given miserable advice from very bad advisors, and he doesn't know the true nature of Iran, the Iranian people, the Iranian culture, and he needs to heal that ignorance. And I think the Iranian people and clerics and scholars can reach out to him. And that's the key principle of the communication. The Iranian leadership and people need to not clash fists or butt heads, but need to be wise and engage in conversation and try and reestablish, rebuild a relationship to show that they're people of peace, to show that they're people of dialogue. And that dialogue and the communication will lead to a warming of relations, and in the warming of relations, we could see all sorts of miraculous changes and redirections. So communication and diplomacy and dialogue is absolutely essential.
Yeah, in the spirit of being fair and balanced, Mr. Trump has indicated that if that he's prepared to meet with Iranian officials if certain changes are made. I would like to see that dialogue go on. I'd like to see, we saw, by the way, we see this in his modus operandi, in his elements of the deal. Once again, he's come on very bombastically in order to leverage a situation and gain control of the situation. He did the exact same approach toward North Korea, if you'll recall. I'm seeing that again with Iran, and I think that there is room for change, there is for positive change and modification if Iranian officials are willing. I mean, everyone thought that North Korea was dead set against even having a talk. I would like to think that the Iranian officials would similarly sit down with particularly Europeans, and I think if a positive message can come from them to Trump, he would be positive in response. There's always hope, and I would like to see positive action. I think it will benefit the world, and again, I think Trump is looking for some kind of a place where he can have a consensus. He knows he's not going to get everything, but at the same time, he does not want violence. And in fact, if you'll recall, just before at the time of Syria, he was thinking of pulling out of the Middle East. And so this is he really feels he needs an agenda, but you also got to consider that his foreign policy, in effect, is his domestic policy. He is using the JCPOA and the move of the embassy into Jerusalem as fulfilling campaign promises in preparation for 2018. These are important to him and to his local constituents, so he's playing to the local media and attention.
I would add to that, I prefer to see confidence-building measures before heads of state get together. I'm not optimistic about what's going to happen with North Korea. I think the problems between the United States and Iran, particularly as perceived from the American side, are so grave that there would have to be steps taken, I think, to as I say, build confidence and to create bridges. Now, as we were driving over here in the car, we were talking about the possibility of reopening the American embassy here, and we were wondering what the Iranian view of that would be, how popular it would be. I'm all in favor of it as a former person. Yeah. Well, yeah. So,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say
about.
This is a storm already.
Well, in that regard, if you follow, I think an approach, I mean, if we're going to be positive thinking and be constructive about all this and not be condemnatory, big word, look at how things have proceeded toward North Korea. Bombastic, we bring in three carrier groups, then there's a silence, and then there's talk begins. Then we see Kim Jong-un most recently releasing 3 hostages. I don't see why Iran, as my colleague Phil says, why Iran could not begin to show at least some goodwill gestures along the same vein. At least to get the process, a dialogue to begin. I don't know that that's asking too much.
Do you think that the U.S. rejection JCPOA would be the beginning of a new war against Iran in the Middle East?
Y'all want to take that?
Yeah, I don't think so. Not by itself. I mean, this is not like there's a one issue that's going to make a war start. This is a collection. And I would say the most critical issue in terms of whether we're going to have a war here in the foreseeable future is probably whether Israel feels confident enough that it can stage an incident or start something that it believes the United States will be drawn into. I think that's the equation that Benjamin Netanyahu is working from. He's made very clear on a number of occasions in his speeches that Iran is the enemy, that Israel is prepared to take out Iran, and he's also hinted, more than hinted, he's directly said, as John Bolton has said, that regime change in Iran is highly desirable. So basically you have someone whose head is already there, and he would like to see a war, but he doesn't particularly want to have to fight it himself. And so I think it's a question of where the balance comes down and when the balance comes down on these issues. I don't think the JCPOA in and of itself is an issue that's going to lead to war.
U.S. attacked Iraq. George Bush just started to threaten Iraq. They have mass destructive weapons, and they threaten, and just Mr. Trump just had the same scenario again, and it's threatening Iran and saying, threatening Syria about mass destructive weapons and like this. And the former CIA correspondent just revealed that they are attempting to form the same scenario for Iran.
Okay, but bear in mind, what you're saying is absolutely correct. But Donald Trump's voice is not the only voice out there. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when Benjamin Netanyahu made his latest ridiculous slideshow to demonstrate that Iran has a nuclear weapon, he was blasted in the American media. I don't think there was a single newspaper that said this was really good information. The only one who believed it was good information, or only 2 or 3, were Nikki Haley and John Bolton and the president. But apart from that, the public opinion in America supports JCPOA. The public opinion does not want a war, and the president has to be aware of that. And if the media is saying this talk about Iran being a secret nuclear power is nonsense, then he has to pay attention to that too. So.
And I would just say the president needs to be aware of the political realities. He was elected by the American people for a populist agenda, again, of no war and removing us from the Middle East. If he betrays that, he'll be a one-term president. He'll be removed in November. If he's wise, he will, again, as many generals, real military leaders who have taken an oath and support the peace and the Constitution, real military men in the United States like myself, have stood up and said the American people don't want war, the European people don't want war. All of this, the false chemical attacks and all of these other things are being used as propaganda, facilitated and administered by Netanyahu and his agents, and it's causing the president to be provoked into these actions. And he needs to be aware of that and change course. And I think we're seeing, the JCPOA was a massive wake-up call. All of Europe, all of the European people suddenly awoke to the reality of, once again, as my colleague Michael Maloof had said, this is 2003 all over again. But the difference is, no one on this planet, no one in the United States and no one in Europe wants a repeat of this, except a few maniacs who have this delusion that they can conquer the world in the name of American democracy. And I'd also call on Vladimir Putin and the other leaders, Russia, China, to consolidate, and the Eastern European Christian countries of Eastern Europe, to all form a new coalition to preserve Iran. Because what happens to Iran is going to happen to Russia tomorrow. It's going to happen to China in 10 years. And they better be aware of that.
Yeah.
If Mr. Trump is wise, but Mr. Trump has shown this year that he's not wise enough to take advice. And you know, Trump is the man who stands for what he said. So
But
I don't think that.
But we saw that initially in his exchange of fire and fury with North Korea, calling Kim Jong-un little rocket man. I mean, it was like a verbal sparring, but then he calmed down. Again, it's one more. He's following his negotiating approach that he used in real estate, which seemed to work for him. Now he's applying it to negotiating with Kim Jong-un. Again, I invite you all to read the elements of the deal, chapter 2 of The Art of the Deal. You'll see he follows that pattern every single time. But and I think he will allow for an opening for discussion if Iranian officials will send a signal. Kim Jong-un did.
Yes.
So it's not easy.
Say again?
It's not very easy.
Who's not easy?
This for Iranian political element to give signal. It's very, you know, it would make a very sensitive condition here.
They know how to get in contact with the United States government.
خب از دیگران سوال داشته باشیم یه نفر سوال نکنه.
American prisoners. Are you on a sort of like a hidden, semi-hidden, unofficial, would-be unofficial or official mission to talk about this releasing the Americans here? If you can say, of course.
You're asking me?
Well, all of you.
Well,
According to
I raise that only because if you take it as a parallel to how the opening and the paving of the way with North Korea could apply also to Iran. We did not come here with that intention. However, if folks want to talk about it, I have an open mind.
And you're suggesting that they should talk to you about that? I mean, if you want to
again, well, you know, you got to remember the Logan Act. John Kerry got in trouble just a week ago when all he was doing was talking with European leaders that he knew personally about how the JCPOA was a good thing. And he was attacked by Donald Trump and others for violating the Logan Act. The Logan Act is very specific. It says that ordinary American citizens, which includes us, can't negotiate with foreign governments or get involved with foreign governments to discuss foreign policy issues. We can talk with about things very casually, but if we're making specific proposals, that's illegal. And it's, the penalties to it are quite amazing. I mean, it's like 20 years in jail and a $20,000 fine. And so it's not something to trifle with. It's never been successfully prosecuted, but that doesn't mean that a president who really gets mad about it might have his attorney general do so. I'm speculating.
I think to respond further to your question, if the issue were to arise, we would certainly inform people back home that this issue arose, but we're not going to negotiate it, no. That would not be our place, but we can take a message back if necessary.
You can take a message.
Yeah.
And also, if I may, you said something about this Mr. Trump having like bad advisors. Probably you're naming John Bolton and Nikki Haley and probably others. So U.S. administration is not just John Bolton, Nikki Haley, and Mr. Trump, just three of them. Is it like all these decisions coming from because of bad advisors? You mean that if he had good advisors, then he would have taken better decisions? Is it that what you want to say?
Well, let's look at John Bolton, for example. John Bolton is an extremely intelligent man. He was educated at Yale. No one denies his intelligence. He is also an extremely persuasive and methodical thinker. In a situation where you have a president who basically is ignorant about the world, in spite of his business acumen, is basically ignorant. You can envision the situation where the president is sitting down with John Bolton, and John Bolton, man, he just lays it out like this, and Donald Trump eats it right up. Now, that's not to say that Trump necessarily is always going to agree with the Bolton. And in fact, one of the things that I would have to disagree with my colleague a little bit about Trump is his impulsiveness and the fact that we expect to see, it's the art of the deal, he's doing this because he's going to get this. But that doesn't explain the 2 cruise missile attacks in Syria, both of which were based on no intelligence whatsoever and were done spontaneously for political reasons. So the guy can be impulsive and he can start a war on impulse. So I think it's probably not a good idea to be too confident in his business acumen as being something that transfers over into making him a clever deal maker in the world of diplomacy. That's just my own opinion.
I think one thing that Trump lacks on his staff, as Phil points out, Bolton is a very smart man. There's no question about that. But what he's not getting is strategic thinking. And we have Bolton seems to be have one issue, that's regime change. There isn't a regime change he hasn't liked. And frankly, I think that we need someone at the National Security Advisor level who can provide a more strategic outlook to advise the president that if you take this action, this will happen. For example, JCPOA. He did JCPOA, which will have the potential for new sanctions, undermining jobs, yet another campaign promise he made was tax cut to increase jobs. So how do you reconcile his 2 campaign promises, and yet they're in conflict, fundamental conflict with one another? Why isn't he being guided that if this happens, it could have an impact on this action? We're not seeing that. I don't know that he's getting that advice. And again, it may be that he's trying to leverage Iran to take some initiative. And the Europeans certainly have been talking to Iranian officials. There's no doubt that Macron and Theresa May have pointed that out. But his actions and his threats of that kind send shudders through the markets. And already we have companies in the United States that, because of his intention to impose sanctions, are pulling out of deals. Boeing. I mean, we just flew on an airplane, an old 737. Boeing aircraft, Airbus. They're scared to death economically. I mean, this is having a major impact. It's costing billions and billions of dollars, not to mention jobs. So what happened to his campaign promise to increase jobs? Why does he allow one campaign promise to undercut another? I don't have an answer. But clearly, he needs to have a greater strategic vision than what he's, and advice than he's getting now.
I would just say too, that the political rhetoric that is circulating in Washington that is viscerally anti-Russian, for example, is completely inconsistent and out of sync with what the American people feel. The American people do not fear Russia. In fact, everyone under the age of 55 has no problem with Russia. Let me say that again. Everybody under the age of 55 has no problem with Russia, or Iran for that matter, because they are of an age that they have not been prejudiced or soured or bittered. And they're looking to the hope of the future with optimism. And that's why President Trump really got a popular election. And if he squanders that, if he engages in a reckless foreign policy, which is not his strong suit. Domestic policy maybe, but foreign policy is completely out of line with him. He's never served in the military, and he's never been a diplomat, and he's never been in the United States government. If he embarks on this reckless course, he will be easily defeated. He may even be impeached. He may even be tried for a war crime. But he needs to really wake up and recognize that the people of the United States do not have a war agenda, and nor do the people of Europe have an agenda. And the leadership may be completely out of touch, but the people of Europe and the United States need to rise up and make their opinion known and clearly and firmly say, we will not have a repeat of the 2003 Iraq War or Afghanistan, and we will not tolerate regime change because it may destabilize the world with a war that could end the world.
And according to your expertise with intelligence, defense ministry, and Pentagon, if I took it right, how do you see this ending? Do you think any military conflict will happen between the U.S. government and Iran, or how do you see it? How this conflict between Iran and the U.S. will end with this Trump administration? This is important for these people.
I think it can be avoided. I think it can be avoided if people can come together and start talking. Iron out those differences. I mean, no one wants this war. No one wants a repeat of 2003, as Scott said. But it's going to be much worse than 2003 if there is a conflict, because it's going to bring in everybody beyond the Middle East. And that's what we're hoping to avoid. So talking is cheaper than going to war.
And I would say, I would agree with that completely. I think there's a fundamental issue here, which is essentially that if Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump insist on what they see as Iran as they see it as a global threat, which is obviously ridiculous, or even as a regional threat, which is ridiculous. But if they persist in seeing this, and they persist in the myth that Iran has a secret nuclear program and that it needs regime change, then there's no ground in the middle. And I think the only answer eventually will be war. That's an unfortunate assessment, I think. But the fact is that these positions are not irreconcilable. It needs people of goodwill at a certain point to step up, and I think that's what's been lacking. All we're hearing out of Nikki Haley and Pompeo and Bolton is war rhetoric. Surely these people are more intelligent than that, but they seem to think that this is what is selling at the moment. That's why at the beginning I talked about changing the narrative. We have to change the narrative so that not talking about war will be a desirable quality. So.
آخرین سوال. خیلی خوب. کسی سوال نداره. خیلی ممنون. مشکل کنید دوستان محترم.